Hi, my name is Alyssa Cuffy Anoaha, and you are listening to the Durham Artist Archive. This is where we tell the story of Durham through the eyes of artists. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome back to the Durham Artist Archive. Today I am really excited to feature Huiyin Zhou, and they are a really talented multimedia artist, cultural producer, photographer, writer, so many things. And I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I use they them pronouns. My name was taken from an ancient collection of poetry called Shijing in China, and it means virtuous reputation. I have been in Durham for the past 4 years, and I've been really enjoying the creative and organizing community here. I do a lot of work around healing, social justice, queer kinship, and feminism, diasporic memory, and etc. And I, I feel like it's always interesting to rethink how I can introduce myself. Alternatively, because I have this bio that I give to people like routinely, and sometimes I feel like, am I trapped in my own work among the containers that I set for myself? And so I'm trying to start a practice where I want to rewrite my bios or like different ways to introduce myself and like think about what I'm practicing at the moment as a practice of like transformation and also just a play in a game to keep my creative juices flowing as well. I think I'm a very community oriented person. I joke about being a full-time friend. I love taking walks. I love observing and taking notes about what I'm hearing, and especially during meaningful conversations with friends and other artists. As we speak right now, I have some notes from a previous conversation laid in front of me. I'm also known for bringing multiple cameras and notebooks with me at all times when I show up to events or friends' gatherings. And yeah, I love documenting memories with people that I love and care about. And that's also where a lot of my creativity feels nourished by. It's the relationships that I build with people. So I would say I'm a friend, I'm a community member, I am a documentarian, I'm an anthropologist, and I'm a walker. I love taking walks.
I love that. I think I've also been thinking a lot about how I define myself and how I describe myself to other people, because I feel like I am so many things. It's hard to like put it in one sentence at a party. And I find myself kind of saying something different depending on the audience I'm around. I was just thinking about the quote you shared with me the last time we spoke, where you said you talk to ghosts in ghost language. I just thought that was so beautiful. I think about that all the time now. And the other piece I think about with that is, does that make me more or less authentic to be changing my story depending on who I'm talking to and presenting myself differently to different audiences? I don't know, but that's just something I've been thinking about, especially as a marketer by trade. That's your whole job, presenting this information to different audiences in different ways. But as a person, I don't know how that makes me feel. But I like how you presented it as a playfulness. It's an experiment, just seeing what happens. But it doesn't have to be so deep,
Thank you for sharing that. Definitely relate to that a lot, especially, I think, as someone who grew up in China and came to the US initially for higher education, and navigating a lot of different kinds of identities, positionalities, and in the ways that I situate myself relationally to other people, to the places I'm in, or to the historical context that I am working with, and especially both like in my personal life and in relation to my work as well. There's that element of just navigating the spaces in between. I feel when I'm in an academic space, because I was trained in anthropology and gender studies, and I think in the academic space, I'm always the organizer or like the activist or like the social practice person. But then in the organizing space, I'm always the more like cultural organizer and artist. And then in art spaces, I'm always the activist. So there's like all of those very nuanced ways in which I situate myself and my work in relation to others. And I find in some ways like a lot of freedom from it as well, because then I don't need to play by any of the set rules. And I can both, well, sometimes play with the rules and sometimes play against it and sometimes subvert it. And I think that is a really important part of my practice as well. And yeah, navigating that space of in-betweenness and finding groundedness in spaces that may be transitory or amidst like instability.
Yeah. A couple of things are coming up for me there. One, in your website bio, you describe yourself as a diasporic bird, which I thought was really pretty as well. And I can see that in how you just described yourself there as well, of transit and transition and moving between spaces. The other thing that came up for me is the freedom of transition. And I guess this ties back to the bird as well. Just the freedom that being able to own all of these different definitions that gives you. And this is going to tie to another question. Toni Morrison has a poem. This is not the name of the poem, but the line that sticks with me from the poem is, "I'm all the things I've ever loved." And when I hear some of these titles that have resonated with you, anthropologist, organizer, artist, diasporic bird, like these are some of the things you've loved, right? So my question for you is, what's something that you've loved today, or just something that made you happy today?
Thank you so much for that question. I had a really beautiful time with some friends last night, celebrating a friend's birthday early before they need to head out for 3 weeks for a family trip. And we decided to have an impromptu sleepover. And so I woke up surrounded by my friends and we made breakfast together. It was scrambled eggs with salmon, baked potatoes, and okra.
Oh, for breakfast?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very nutritional
Yes.
breakfast for the diversity of our microbiomes. So that's very sweet, and I feel very nourished in my friendships. And so that's something that made me feel a lot of love today. And I want to bring that energy into our conversation.
That's really sweet. So I want to lean into that portion about community. You mentioned that you've been in Durham for about 4 years. So tell me about your relationship to Durham, and just, I know you've done a lot of community organizing. Tell me what some of that has looked like.
Thank you for that question. I came to Durham initially in 2021. So back then I was studying cultural anthropology at Duke. And before I came here, I didn't know a lot about Durham, actually. Initially, I thought it would just be a place where I would go to school in. And I didn't really know that much about, for example, the relationship between Duke and Durham, the kind of impacts and mostly negative impacts of predominantly white institutions in a lot of the community spaces that they occupy and continue to extract from. And so with that positionality, like, I do want to be transparent about that's what initially brought me here. And there is a certain level of privilege that enabled that international mobility and cultural capital etc., etc. Even if, as back then when I was an international student, there is and continue to be a lot of racialized experiences that they put me in marginalized positions and making me find it very hard to, for example, have access to resources or build community. And yeah, so it can, the both things can be true, the marginality and at the same time the privilege that enabled me to come here in the first place. And I think my first encounter with Durham was actually through a community engaged research project that was about Gear Cemetery, which is the first African American cemetery in Durham. And so I was paired with a community organization called Friends of Gear Cemetery, and that was when I started to learn more about the history of Durham, specifically focusing on Black workers in Durham in relation to Duke. And that experience was very transformative for me. And right now, I'm not sure if the exhibit is still on view, but they had an exhibit at the Museum of Durham History about Gear Cemetery, and that included a research piece that I did at the beginning of my encounter with Durham. I spent a lot of time across different spaces. And for example, in New York, that was where I started my art and organizing collective called the Chinese Artists and Organizers Collective. Our acronym is CAO, Cao Collective. We were more active in New York because there is a lot of Chinese diasporic activists like from China who are currently based in the US who are in New York. And so I think at first, as I was navigating, like, oh, what is my role in movement building, like transnationally, and how can I bring together all of these different legacies and things that I'm learning from both like organizing spaces in China and also organizing spaces in the US, how can I bring it together? That was when I gravitated towards a lot of the community, the organizing scene, Chinese speaking organizing scene in New York. And so for a couple of years, I think I was physically here, but I wasn't really like here. And then at one point, I realized that I want to actually build more intentional relationships with the people who are here, and I want to learn more about what is happening here and like what people are doing here, both in terms of art and also cultural organizing. And I wanted to be more present in where I am, starting from last year, around last spring, I would say, of 2024. That was when I started to really feel more connected in the art and organizing community in Durham through initially actually through Palestine fundraising, where a lot of the work I did was in person, like organizing fundraiser exhibits or going tabling at in-person events. And that was where actually I met a lot of the people that I'm friends with right now. And yeah, so I have done a few exhibits. I had a residency at Durham Art Guild last year and had a studio from them and did a solo exhibit called Nostalgia is the Ghost of Care that took place this March of 2025. Well, it's 2025. And I did another exhibit called Bodies Tender with Grief with my collaborator and friend Laura at Durham Arts Council, also from March to May. There were some other group shows here and there that I've done, and I'm also pretty active in spaces like North Star, Church of the Arts. Yeah, and I love taking walks in my neighborhood. So observing how the climate is actually kind of similar to where I grew up in Dongguan, like China, with like the humidity, the high temperatures. And, I feel really grateful for the connections that I've built in Durham, and I'm very looking forward to continue building home here. Yeah, and figuring out my next steps as well.
You felt you got more deeply connected with the local community just last year, but I know that you've been doing work not only in Durham, but in North Carolina, like much longer than that, right? Like you've had some documentary work in 2023, some other awards and grants that you've gotten here in North Carolina before that. And I'm thinking about how even just last year, all the exhibitions that you've had since then, you had to apply before that, right? So that's something that came up for me, and also how the community that you felt you started to build came with you organizing, and that came with you like putting yourself out there, which is so important and has kind of been a theme that I've been hearing. The last episode of the second season that I did, I went through all of the episodes and tried to just find through lines, right? Like what were the consistent comments that were coming up? And the one was that you just have to like get out and talk to people, right?
Yes.
That's how you build community.
Yes.
You can build online community, but it's not a replacement for being in person. And I'm curious why or what inspired you. You kind of touched on it, but I want to go deeper into like what happened in that moment that made you want to get out and join that group. I know you said it was about Palestine, but was there anything else to it that made you want to get involved with that specific group?
Yeah, question. I really want to respond to your point about the difference between online communities and like in-person community building, because that's something I've been also pondering over, because I realized that a lot of my organizing, a lot of my community work started online, because partly also because in China, because of a lot of political repression and kind of mass depoliticization, and that has been happening structurally over many years. And that's something that I also see happening here in the US as well, and like across the globe. And because of that, it's very difficult to build community, especially around like social justice, like in person. When I was back in China, a lot of civil society or like action oriented spaces, especially at the beginning of COVID in 2020, that's when I started to be more involved in organizing. I also started with fundraising actually and mutual aid for sanitation workers in Zhou, which is the city that I went to school in as well. When I first started doing that, a lot of things had to be online. That was when I started to participate in a lot of webinars and talks and hearing from different people. And I joined a bunch of reading groups about like solidarity building, especially around like Afro-Asian solidarity. And I also helped with editorial collective called Uncover in Chinese, and we did like translation projects together to like bring stories of the Chinese diaspora during COVID like to a broader audience. And so a lot of experiments at collective work and community building for me really started online. And that is partly because of COVID and partly because of depoliticization and how online spaces really did provide a lot of political education for me, and I learned a lot through doing things with other people. And in the US too, a lot of Chinese queer feminist spaces, because we're also very dispersed across different places, and not just across North America, also like across Europe, Southeast Asia, other places. In 2022, I actually participated in like an organizing fellowship, and that resulted in a organizing conference that I helped organize for Chinese diaspora activists in New York. That in-person connection really, really struck me. And I started to think about, oh, can I bring this like to where I am and where I'm located? Like, and so that was when I started building like a Chinese queer feminist group for like loose like community space like here in Durham. And we like did a lot of organized like teach-ins and postcard writing events and private conversations, vigils, and community building spaces. And it was very grassroots. Like I had zero funding or nothing. It was me and some friends. And that was really, really sweet. And then with Palestine fundraising, somehow every year I end up in some sort of fundraising, whether it's like for gender education, like sex education, nonprofit in China, or like for mutual aid efforts. Somehow I'm always doing fundraising at some point every year. And with the Palestine fundraising, it felt like at the time that it was a more accessible way for me to materially help in a way because of like legal reasons, like visa instability, everything. It was harder for me to participate in things that are more outwardly political. And so that was my first like motivation, just really like wanting to learn more and see if I can help and mobilize my own community, like for example, like Chinese speaking community, to see the interconnections between our struggles. And so that was my initial intention. And through working together with other people, collaborating and like inviting other artist friends to contribute their prints and their artwork to sell at local events, and talking about what solidarity means to us and how we can intentionally build out through our work. I think that was very, very meaningful for me and continues to be an anchor in my life as well. So even though I don't do a lot of proactive fundraising at this moment because of just capacity limits, so I've learned to ask for help. I've learned to tap into different resources, and also reconnected actually with a lot of friends and community that probably I wouldn't be able to reconnect with otherwise. And so I feel really, really grateful for that.
Yeah. And I think the theme that I'm hearing throughout this all is that whether it was online or in person, you were always doing the work and actively connecting with folks versus kind of being like a bystander in any of these missions and any of these communities, which I think is really important, whether it was online or in person. I don't mean to disparage online community. Like that's very important. I've built a lot of community online. But I've been thinking for myself how I can be more intentional about building in-person community as well. Because I saw a quote that said, I'm really on my quotes today, but I saw a quote that said something about community is not convenient. It's not going to be comfortable, and you just have to embrace that awkwardness, you know? And once you break through that awkward phase, that's where you reach community.
Yes.
And I think online, sometimes it's easier to break through that awkward phase because sometimes you already know what you have in common. It's like, okay, I can review your Instagram and we already have these 5 things. I can just send you a funny video. And it's like, that's the icebreaker versus, oh, I have to come up to you in person and talk to you. Ugh. Like, that's different, you know, than just sending a funny video. But I know that all of these experiences have influenced your art, and not just your art, but your latest exhibitional art space specifically, right? So can you tell me more about, for those of us who live at the Shoreline, Beyond? Yes. So give me the title back and tell me about the inspirations for the show and just what it means for you.
Thank you. I actually brought a copy of the brochure about the show, this catalog that Laura and I put together with kind of a walkthrough of the gallery and descriptions, artist statements for each piece. And the show is called Bian Bian. Bian means to braid, and Bian means the shore across, or the shore on the other side. And in Buddhism, it means kind of the other world, or like through transcendence, your next life. And there's a lot of themes of crossing, of in-betweenness, of memory, because when you reach the other shore, you are also supposed to forget about experiences from past life. And it's also about grief and how we process grief, what is the color of our grief. Sometimes can we describe that, and where does it sit in our bodies? I think all of these themes are helping Laura and I braid different parts of our work that we do together, whether like in our individual practice, and I'm also putting quotation marks because I think how kind of art is, it is very communal and relational as well, even when it is technically under one person's name. It's still, I see myself at least as a vessel through which energy and memory and experiences channels through, and I'm mediating these experiences, but I don't own them, or I don't actively claim ownership of them. And this exhibit brings together different works. There are publications, for example, that we have on floating shelves for people to peruse, and these include like community zine about. And it was like a land workshop that some people that we're in community with in Toronto who organized a land workshop on Palestine. And then there's another poetry book that we created with our collective and our community members. There's an academic journal that featured a piece of writing that I did for one of our durational performances. And there's another magazine that featured a interview of me and Laura talking about our work. And so we have these publications that kind of add more context to the broader community work that we do as people wish to enter that space. And we also have a lot of pictures that Lauren and I took of each other, also including Polaroids as well. And these photos, we named it I Look in My Body and Then I See You. And it's really a love letter to our friendship as well, and thinking about the intimacy and the kinship that we've built with each other over the past 3 years that we've been closely collaborating, and thinking a lot about reflecting about what it means to see and to be seen, to witness and to be witnessed in all kinds of forms. And thinking about also the intimacy of exhaustion, the intimacy of tiredness, because we've seen each other at our most tired selves, and what kind of possibilities we emerge from that, and what kind of care practices can we still build with each other, especially in those moments of burnout and exhaustion as we navigate this world. And we also have photos from our respective series or photo-based works about our grandparents, and some of which was actually on view at the Durham Arts Council show as well. We also have 16 millimeter film paintings that we did as a part of a 5-person workshop from 2023, and thinking a lot about the topics of home and grief, and using collective practice as a way to process that together. There's also a video that Laura has been working on that discusses their relationship to one-child policy in China and gender and topics of shame and relationship to the conditions of their birth as well. Our video also includes some 16mm footage, the 16mm that we did together. Yeah, and the wall is pink. So we picked that wall color because we wanted to not only we treat exhibitions not only as a place to showcase a certain body of work, but at the same time as a space that we're building and thinking a lot about how people experience the space. And so we chose the color lotus because we wanted the space to be welcoming and evoke a sense of safety and softness and gentleness that we ground our work in. And also because Lotus thematically connects to, for example, the tattoos that we have, and connects to my mother's hometown. It also connects to the themes of rebirth as well in Chinese culture. And yeah, so with this body of work in the process of creating this multimedia installation, we wanted to braid together all of these different facets of kinship and homemaking and memory work together. And yeah, and so I really appreciated the fluidity with which we approached installation, and we explored installing untraditionally with floating frames, which took a lot of time. We spent like 50 hours in the gallery that week. It was really exhausting, but also very rewarding. And just allowing more space in between the images and thinking there are a lot of images of water, images of the sky, and also we don't really show anybody's faces outside of just the two of us. And for example, our grandparents we only have like images of their hands, and so which is very different actually from like previous exhibits that I've done. And yeah, so I'm really grateful for having the space to explore how we braid these stories and feelings together, and how we can create a space where people can take a pause and reflect and or sit on the benches and talk to a friend, and yeah, a space for reflection and pause and safety as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you all were very intentional and creative with how you arranged the space as far as all of the different mediums you included. By the time this is posted, it will still be live, so definitely go check it out. But it seems so engaging. It seems multisensory. And it seems like I really like the fact that there won't be, or that there aren't as many faces, because I feel like someone can put themselves in that photo or put someone they know in that photo, and it'll just be all the more resonant. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the back of somebody's head and I'll be like, oh, that looks like my dad. And I'll be like, oh, but that's not my dad. And then I'll tell my dad, and he'll be like, you think all Black people look the same? And I'm like, no, no. but I just love all that. And so something that came up for me there as well is I'm hearing a lot about you archiving things and preserving things and being able to reuse them in your exhibitions in different and unique ways every time. And it sounds like that's also tied to your anthropology practice as well. Can you just tell me how you got into archiving and what that looks like for you?
I definitely appreciate my family for my archival or documentary instincts. So one famous quote, well, not famous, but one quote that I remember from my dad is write it down in your journal before it becomes history. For context, he used to work as a journalist, and he is a poet and cultural worker in China as well. And my mom also used to be the documentarian for her family, and she wrote a piece about her grandmother, which I didn't know about until I also wrote a piece about her grandmother and my great grandmother. And then at one point I was like, oh, what was the essay that you wrote that got you that award for when you were much younger, like in your early 20s? And she was like, oh, actually, I also wrote about the same topic. And so there are these, I think, threads that like were starting to braid together even before I was consciously aware of them. And I think a lot about archival practices in relation to grief, in relation to loss, and in relation to witnessing, because for example, for my family, we don't have a lot of family heirlooms because of war and displacement and migration. So that's something I continue to feel a lot of grief around, and this desire to know more and the desire to learn more and think about where, how, like, excavating like ancestral knowledge that I don't necessarily have access to right now. I think also a lot about organizing and the loss that I experienced because of political repression, and a lot of spaces that I've been part of that have had to close down because of many, many reasons, and people that I've lost touch with because of fear. And I really started to be more intentional about archiving, um, actually because of my collective, and because I wanted to document the things that we were doing, like the performances we were doing, the workshops we hosted, the laughter, the tears, and the connection that we shared. And I started bringing like a disposable camera to these spaces. And initially, I just did it for fun, or like as an offering, as a gift to my community. And then people started telling me that they really appreciate that practice. And so I started also experimenting with like passing the camera around and letting other people document from their perspective. And so I am very intentional about also creating pieces of memory. For example, asking people to sign on posters or a big piece of cloth from a teach-in, and keeping those things or handwritten notes that we have during organizing meetings, and Polaroids from dinners and potlucks, where that's where like the most beautiful conversations that, for me at least, emerge from those spaces of gathering and sharing. And I also keep letters and postcards that people write to me as well. Some people would say that I hoard.
Yes.
um, and I'm trying to be mindful of how much weight and how much space I'm holding for not only my own memory, but collective memory as well. And how do I balance also needing breathing space and not feeling like that burden or that weight is on me and me only all the time. And yeah, so photography and writing are really two main ways through which I process grief, and that channels a lot into my documentary and archival practice. A lot of things that I documented at first, I never thought that I would show it like at some point, but sometimes really energetically, it's like, oh, I feel called to look for that piece or that letter that someone had written to me, and how this is in conversation with something else, a photograph or a bracelet or a book that I may show like in an exhibition setting. And so a lot of these are very much in conversation with each other.
I feel very similar as far as I just like capturing these memories. I have journals from when I was in middle school, and I revisit them just to see what was going on, just to, you could say I'm trying to reconnect with my inner child, but really I'm just being nosy. Just like, what was she up to? What was she thinking about? And I also think of myself as an archiver and have been doing that work long before I realized it, back to my old Tumblr blog and like just saving all sorts of things, all sorts of resources, political things, things about sexuality and gender, which tying back to online communities, I was learning about that in person, right? Learning about, there used to be this site called Stumble Upon.
Oh,
Have you heard of that?
I haven't.
Someone has heard of this, but there was a site where you could click a button, and this is back before the internet was more than just social media. And so it would just take you to a random website. And the internet was so big, and these websites would be so like diverse. So one website is like, this is how to draw, or this is an artist's personal website, or this is a website about the deep history of a specific building, just like all these archival websites. And I would just scroll through that all day and then save all my favorite websites and revisit them. So doing little things like that, even back to like middle school and younger, up to now, where I have this podcast where I'm archiving things. I'm trying to take all of my photos off of Google Drive and put them onto a personal hard drive because I hate paying for Google Drive because I never have enough space. I keep having to pay for more. I have so much paper or firma, like cards and postcards and notes, and it's just taking up space. And the piece of me feels like, damn, I need to just trash some of this. Do I need my birthday card from when I turned 12? All it says is happy birthday. Like, probably not, but it's so cute, you know? But I think that I'm holding on to them maybe for a different reason than what you just described. I'm sure there's nuances for you as well, but you talked about it in the context of like your grief and things like that. But I often return to those things for like joy when I am grieving, you know? But do you have any thoughts on that?
That's very beautiful. I definitely relate to what you're sharing about joy. I think for me, grief and joy are like sisters or lovers, friends, however you call it. They feel very well, they sit differently for me in my body, or like the texture, and also it's always changing in terms of the context or the kinds of grief or joy that I'm experiencing. But I feel like when I initially started archiving, the grief was more present. There was that fear of loss that I was creating from, which led to actually a lot of stress as well, because I have so many stress dreams about like not like losing my camera, not having a roll of film when it's a very important moment I want to remember. Even like quite a few dreams about my paternal grandparents who had passed away, and that I wanted to take a photo of them, but I realized my film had melted in my camera. And so I think that fear of loss, it was a motivation for me to create, but at the same time, it caused me a lot of stress as well in holding on to the things that I am afraid of losing. And so I think this past year, I've been thinking about how can I recenter the love and care that lie underneath that grief, the joy and the practices or relationships that I want to build with people. And I think shifting that perspective, or like regrounding myself and what I would like to build from here. Not saying that the grief is not there, it's still there, and I think it is my most tender and honest teacher, but I also want to make space for the joy that I experience. And I think that recentering that has been nourishing my practice a lot recently.
Thank you. So I have another question for you, and we're going to start to wrap up soon. But I recently got to visit your studio at Queen Street Magic Boat. So I'd really love to hear about your experience, not only having a studio, I know this isn't your first one, but that plus being a full-time creative and artist. Like, how has that been, and how has having a studio aided that experience for you?
It was so lovely to have you come by, Queen Boat. I have had the studio since July, and I initially got connected to the space through the first exhibit that they did called Death Planted a Garden. And it was very magical to experience that space and other artists' work. And I met Catherine, who initiated the project, actually, like after some event at the exhibit, and we just started talking while they were making some food in their kitchen. And we really connected over a lot of things that we were grappling with in relation to community, in relation to our creative practice. And so we kept in touch since I think that was October of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're experimenting with this artist co-sharing studio space where I'm currently sharing studio with another artist, Nina. There will be other artists also activating the space through dance residency, or currently another artist, Danny, works in the other studio room. After December, there will be a different artist, Marcus, was coming in. So we're also working through building community agreements and what it means for us to share space. And I've found it really rewarding because I enjoy randomly just having conversations with people when we run into each other in this space. I think for me, as a full time creative, one thing I would say the most difficult thing for me is probably having no boundaries between work and life. I'm always working because my life is my work, and my relationships are my work as well. And like,
Yeah.
not necessarily in work in a capitalist like way, but like it is work. Like the care that we build with each other, it still requires intentionality and effort. And like you said, like community is not convenient. I had a studio with Durham Art Guild residency, and before then with Brick Lab Contemporary Art residency in New York. And while those residencies were very, very meaningful for me, at the same time, I felt like I want to work in a studio that feels a bit different. And I think Queen Boat, at this current stage of my creative process, I really enjoy having a space that is outside of my own living space, but at the same time feeling nourished and inspired by the creative energy that other artists are bringing into the space. At the same time, because it also is open for events that people can book there. And so it feels like a very dynamic and space where I can keep the sacredness of solo practice and having alone time. And that's the slowness of that. And at the same time, feeling connected to other people who also find this space inspiring for them. And that reciprocity and community based nature of the space feels very aligned with what I want to do right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. The space is definitely, it literally is a home, but it also is homey. It's cozy. I think it's so sweet that you first met, but you connected with Catherine over them cooking, that you are getting to co create the space with them. That just feels like a really unique and cool experience to be able to have at this point in your career, too. So that's really cool. If there was someone else who was potentially interested in getting a studio space at Queen Street Magic Boat or somewhere else in general, what would you say to them? Like, for or against it? Like, what was the thing that made you jump to doing it?
I think I would definitely suggest assessing what they want from a studio. For example, there are different kinds of studios. Like there are spaces that are more that have more foot traffic, like regularly, that are more like traditional artist studio spaces. And so I think there is a lot of merit in that public facing quality of it as well. But at the same time, like having people constantly access your working space can be draining as well. And so how would really like what priorities people have for having a studio space outside of where they live, I think would be a first step that I suggest. And also, I also really believe in the feelings I have in my body and like how I connect or don't connect with the space. And I think with Queen Boat, there's something energetically very aligned. I just really love lounging around in the yellow couch in the living room or riding on my arm while I'm reading a book and looking out the window and seeing the plants. And that's something that is different from having a traditional studio. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I just feel like it's a different experience. And depending on people's priorities and preferences and goals as well, I really hope that people can find a space that feel aligned with them, whether it's logistically or just a feeling.
Yeah, Queen Street Magic Boat feels like it's in a fairy garden. It's so whimsical to walk in and walk under the flower tree arch thing that's happening. And I haven't been into the backyard, but I've seen the pictures with the lights hanging above, and there's a tree house back there. It just looks beautiful. And so anyone who has not been there yet, I highly recommend making your way out for a future event. But we are going to come to a close. So for my actual final question, where can people find you? What do you have coming up next? What is the closing date for your exhibition? Tell me.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for the conversations that we're able to have today. People can find me on my website, my name, huiyinzhou.com. And my collective's work is at caocollective.com, C-A-O collective.com. And I'm also on Instagram at my first name, Huiyin, dot my last name, Zhou. And I have quite a few events come up for the Art Space exhibit. So I'm doing an artist tour on August 30th, and there will be a September 1st Friday. And I'm teaching a workshop on text and image as creative archiving happening September 20th. And then my collaborator Laura will come back from California to do an artist talk and closing reception together on the 27th of September. And that will be facilitated by Leticia Clementina Thomas. And the next day, on the 28th of September, we'll have a participatory performance working with sticky rice. And it's called Tsuba Punch. And so that's where we'll punch steamed sticky rice together, exploring queer feminist rage and love as transformative power that transforms the rice into a sticky rice cake that nourishes our bodies and our communities. And yeah, that will be at Dorothea Dix Park as part of the Sea Raleigh Public Art Project on September 28th. So I'll look forward to seeing people there and continue to be in touch. And all of this information can be found either through my website or through Instagram as well.
That's so exciting. You have a lot of stuff coming up. So thank you so much for your time again. And for everyone listening, I encourage you to revisit your personal archives. Even if you haven't officially made one yet, revisit your old Facebook posts or just go through your old phone photos and just revisit your personal histories. Talk to the oldest person in your family. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you.